Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect us against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to another episode of The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and this week I'm thrilled to have whistleblower, YouTuber, child abuse advocate and educator, animal lover, all-around sweetheart, survivor ally, and survivor of Still Point Zen Cult, Chrystal, on the show. When I met Chrystal, I had no idea she was a survivor. She had such a supportive presence online in her support and advocacy work towards other survivors that I assumed she was on the outskirts like me and joining this fight from the outside. Little did I know the enormous story this girl has. Reminiscent of past guest, India Oxenburg, Chrystal's story and Still Point Zen Cult parallel on many levels what was able to take place in public view for so long at the NXIVM cult that was finally exposed and taken down, and why this specific topic is so important for people to understand and be aware of. It brings to light how easy it is to unknowingly fall prey to abusers who disguise themselves as masters, coaches, personal development gurus, and even gods. We have a misconception as a society that cults are something that exist but are hidden. And what is vitally important for us to educate ourselves on is being able to identify the cults that exist in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by people like you and I. Because of this, I believe all of you listening will find so much relatability in Chrystal's story, because Chrystal wasn't born into a cult and had no idea of knowing that the Zen community she was handpicked to join by the original Still Point Master himself, Umi, who studied under Osho, another well-known Zen Master most of you have probably heard of, and marketed as a community of like-minded individuals on a path to enlightenment and healing, was actually a dangerous, controlling, and abusive cult with abusive cult masters. When the death of Umi happened during Chrystal's time at Still Point, this story also takes a surprise turn as new leadership took over and shows how abusive cycles in these cult circles rarely stop. They simply take on a new form, shape, and marketing, and repeat the same abusive behaviors all over again onto the trusting and vulnerable people who are simply seeking refuge on their healing journeys. One of the things I love about Chrystal coming out as a whistleblower, exposing the truth about Still Point, is that she's able to take the information she's learned about cults and apply them to how to identify these concepts on a local level as well as on a global level. Whether we want to admit it or not, the political world we live in and those we elect to be in power over us exhibit the same cult-like behaviors and patterns we see in these localized cults. So you guys, without further ado, I'm honored to introduce voice for the voiceless, courageous whistleblower, woman of God, all-around inspiration, and someone I'm lucky to call my friend, Chrystal, onto the show. Chrystal, thank you for being here with me today.
Hey, oh my God, that was amazing.
Oh, I
Yeah,
have
no,
fun doing the intros.
yeah, they're always the best. I was like, okay, we can stop the podcast because you've said everything. Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I appreciate you coming on here today. Your story really is, it's very relatable, because this could happen to anybody. A lot of the stories I have on my podcast are things that the guest had no choice in. They were born into, and it was just something that, they had since they were born. And what we forget if we weren't born in that environment is that these things really exist everywhere, and I think the more people that come out and actually talk about it, the easier it is for other people on the outskirts to recognize, when they're vulnerable and maybe in a position that could happen to them. So maybe for people who haven't checked out your YouTube channel, which you guys, if you haven't, I'm going to link it below and I'll have Chrystal talk about that later. Let's start with just some context about who you were before all this happened and your childhood, and just give kind of some background information that helped lead up to this.
Okay, sure. I was born overseas in Germany and was affiliated with the military, but I was kind of half in, half out. My parents were civilians, but I had the unique experience of never moving. Most military kids, they're rotating every 3 years, but I stayed on the same city overseas for my whole from childhood to young adulthood. And so in that time, I was kind of in this very strange bubble of the military world, which kind of added to certain outlooks I have. And also, because it was such a small Americanized bubble overseas, the religious communities there actually became very ingrained in me as well, and became part of the community that I sought when I started to reach like middle school age. And I think that the trauma of the Christian doctrine, which I experienced, starting for some reason, my parents put me in Catholic church, even though they weren't really Catholics themselves. It was more of a cultural practice. And, I did the first two rites, and which is your baptism and your first communion. And then I kind of got ingrained about the devil and hell and all that fun stuff. And I had an existential crisis when I was 10 because I saw The Exorcist too young, and I assumed that was the true power of Satan. And I was basically terrified for weeks. I couldn't sleep. And because of this moment in my childhood, and everyone around me and outside me confirming that this is a valid fear and I should, I basically, ended up landing in the Protestant youth group community through that, because it was the only place I really felt safe. And so what happened is, like, as I grew up, my connection to God has always been there. Like, I've always felt a very deep connection to source and God, and this like great, wonderful love that is creation. But, because I was the environment I was in, I was kind of using that, knowing that, having that knowing was getting plugged into different kinds of scenarios. So church was the best way I had to explore that side of me. I've always had a very like spiritual interest since I was little, not just in like Christian ideals, but very magical, more on the like magical side of things. The spirituality that tends to look like magic, but is just true spirituality. And so I just like went through life when I was young. I was kind of thinking about God in this very specific, rigid way. And then when I got old enough to recognize that that didn't really suit me, I was able to reject that doctrine itself, but the behavior of giving my power away to another spiritual authority figure was very much deeply ingrained in me. And so as my view of spirituality started to change through adulthood, I did start to get more interested in more of the intangible elements to spirituality. And like what really was this inner knowing is, this truth that everything's connected. And when you start digging into certain resources, you start to hear about certain kinds of teachers, so gurus. And Osho came up early in my life. Before I was never a follower of Osho, but I would read his books in college and just be like, oh, interesting, he's saying something that I intuitively already deeply know. And that is the landscape that I was in when, I was in a very exploring space and kind of walking through life, making mistakes, and very often having these unhealthy relationship dynamics where, things were unbalanced. I was tended to operate more on the codependent side of things, if you want to get into those labels. And so when I was about 25, or is it a good time to segue, you think, into?
Yeah, we could talk about that. The one thing that I did want to ask was anything that you think, as far as relationships with your parents, did you have a stability with them, or were there things that you can look back and say, gosh, these little elements might have contributed to part of that unbalance within me?
Sure. First I got to say that like I think my parents are great, solid people. Like I don't have any, issue or emotional drama about it. I'm really happy and grateful for how I was raised. But of course, nothing's perfect. And there were a lot of very challenging dynamics where my father was, I don't know, I hope he doesn't watch this. Please don't be offended. I'm not trying to offend you.
We know
um,
that parents are their kids, my mom was, 21 when she had her first kid. It's like they're not going to be perfect and that's okay.
yeah, yeah. My dad he was in the Air Force, then he was an educator in the high school, and his just very regimented, very rule-based, very not a lot of emotion, not a lot of playfulness. And there were a lot of times where it felt very scary to be with around him. He could be very aggressive and domineering. And there was also a lot of pornography in my home, which was another like weird thing about my childhood that I think was not good. um, and did kind of lend to these it was a big part of ending up in a cult situation, is that your energetic boundaries are not very good. And so even though the thing about like being in those spiritual circles is that like every element of your psyche tends to be messed with, and like so sexuality is a very big part of that. And so my sexual boundaries are already kind of fucked up from that. And yeah, but overall, I mean, I learned to be a very good girl, a very obedient child, even though I wasn't, because I like, as you can tell, I'm like always wanting to say the truth. And it's like I still have to fucking talk about
You're like the most rebellious, obedient person. You're so nice that you want to be led to trust people and to like do good for them and for yourself. And I think that's
it.
where it's like an innocent obedience where it's like, gosh, well, I love you and I trust you and I know that you love me. So, I'm gonna try to listen and apply what I'm learning.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah,
it.
so that was about it.
Yeah. And I don't mean to ask that and say that, I know like I had a good childhood, but there's things that my parents did that lended to me having to heal things later on,
Mhm.
and I think that's just important for people to analyze about themselves and just, realizing vulnerability. So I appreciate you talking about that. But yeah,
Yeah.
let's go on to maybe how you stumbled across um what later became known as Still Point. Well, it was at that time, but just what we know of it now, and just kind of that journey of how you discovered that and got roped into it.
Yeah. So I was going to start my master's degree in education in Santa Cruz, California, and I didn't have any place to really start. So I searched online. I found out about woofing, which is opportunities to work on organic farms in exchange for room and board. So on this weird online forum, this guy named Star told me about Stillpoint, and I actually met Star later, and he's crazy, 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 insane guy.
Oh
So it's
no.
just weird that like it was him that brought me in there.
Yeah.
Um, and I came in as a woofer, hoping that it was a good space just to get my feet on the ground in Santa Cruz before my master's degree started. And then as soon as I joined there, or as soon as I got in, it was an interesting, here was finally a place where everybody was like using my language, my spiritual language, and saying things that really did resonate with me. And it was a very structured routine of going inward and meditating. There's a daily routine. It was not ignored. Like if you didn't comply with how things ran there, you were out the door. So I was already like very good at complying, so I was fine with that.
So they would just kick
And
kick people out if they didn't do something that they were ordered to.
well, yeah, as I was a woofer there for a while, and for a year or so I was woofing there, maybe 2 years almost. And during that time, I saw a lot of people get kicked out just because they like weren't they were like a threat to Umi, or
Interesting.
they were a threat to, he even kicked out some people that I would like start to get romantically involved with, and then he would kick them out and like give me lectures on how boys are.
Stop. Oh my goodness. So was he the person that brought you on there that Star introduced you to? Or was it somebody else that you had talked to that brought you in as a woofer?
Star's the one who told me about it, and then I got in touch with them, and then they were like, yeah, we need a woofer, come on over.
And then
Mhm.
during that, you're obviously on the same property as Umi, so you're seeing him in passing and you're interacting even if you're not fully immersed in the group yet.
Right, yeah, he would have like these daily meditations, and so you would meet with him, but every interaction with him was very controlled, because he was very high and mighty in his room. Also at the time, I think he was already diagnosed with cancer. He was in the process of dying, and like I joined there, and I think he was dead within 6 to 8 months after I was there.
Wow.
Maybe a year. My timing's a bit off. It could have been a little longer, but so I joined, and it was already known that this was going on. But he did, but I think he was always pretty reclusive. It was the guru role, so he wasn't really spending time with you outside of the holy areas. And but he did, before I was part of the Sangha, which is what the official group would be called. He did single me out during meditation and invited me to stay, like telling me this was the right place for me. And at that time, I was starting to feel like it was the right place for me, because I was ready to go into get my master's degree, but I wasn't really aligned with. I hate the education system in the States, and as a teacher, I didn't want to participate in it, and so I was never really 100% sure that that's what I wanted to do anyway. And it kind of became an out for me. It felt like God led me there. I was there. I remember crying, sifting compost, and like crying and feeling so grateful that I was finally in this place with these people. Um, and being invited felt so like special, because he was such a I always thought of him as the white stag. And in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, there's like the white stag. And I would call him that because you'd see him like walk the property sometimes, very rarely. And it felt like seeing the white stag.
Could you give a little bit of background on him? For I know people might know Osho, but they might not. And then I think
Mhm.
this guy, he's his own unique dynamic. What is his background, and who is Umi?
So Umi I think his real name is Tom Lodge, and he's from England. And he originally was I don't know if you know like pirate Radio Caroline. He was on this like famous pirate radio boat that actually had a film made about it. So he was already kind of in the scene of, I don't know, he's like kind of famous, but not really. But he was involved in these very kind of cool things, and ended up joining the Osho cult. I call it a cult because I mean, fuck Osho, honestly. You hear some
All
messed
of
up stuff
them.
about him. And that was totally a cult too. But he was there. And then he met his wife there, Delphi, who was also a part of the Sangha when I joined. And Delphi was kind of the matron of the group and kind of ran everything, because Umi was too holy to run his Sangha. Um, and yeah, he was going off, he used a lot of Osho's techniques, and I can talk about that a little more later, but a lot of these meditation techniques are designed to, or I perceive them to be designed to disassociate yourself from your trauma. And it can be disguised as healing, but what you're really doing is, the word is spiritually bypassing, which is thrown around a lot these days. Um, but to me, what it looked like and what the cult seemed to behave like was that it was a bunch of spiritual numbing to the true, what everyone was trying to escape, the reasons we were all there to begin with. Um, and Osho, if you're not familiar with Osho, he was a guru that became, it has a very controversial story. But Umi was with Osho, and then he left Osho and went to a different master named Makairi, I think was his name. And with Makairi, he had his spiritual awakening, which would be why people follow him. And I think with the awakening state, I think it is very possible for people to push themselves to new levels of spiritual awareness without being completely balanced in themselves. And I think that's what kind of tends to create these guru types that end up being predatory and parasitic in the end, but look very holy when you interact with them. And so he had his awakening. And when he returned from that experience, people started, or the story that they tell me is that people started to notice he was acting different, and they started to form a group around him and started to form a cult around him. And the story could go that it's their fault, the followers' fault, that they're in the cult, and not Umi. That Umi was just being his awesome self and everyone came to him. But the true story, and how it really works, is that Umi was knowingly allowing this new scene to form around him, and it became quite a popular group. I know that they had a very beautiful property and had been established for at least a decade by the time I was there, and had in the greater community, there were a lot of people that would come listen to him talk every Sunday. And it's an interesting place.
And could you talk a little bit about, for people who might not know, and you don't have to go really deep into it, but could you give an overview of what Zen is? And then also Stillpoint, how was Stillpoint marketed, and what was it like whenever you were there? Was it like this gated community where everything was in? And if you could just give a little bit of an overview of what you were looking at, because it sounds amazing. Like, if you don't understand what's going on, I could picture this as being, almost an oasis of something that just seems incredible. So I'd love to just hear from your perspective how that all appeared to you whenever you got introduced to it.
Yeah, sure. So Zen is a Japanese philosophy, and I think I'm even afraid to define it wrong, because honestly, I'm just like any dogma these days. I'm like, I don't even care.
I don't even know how to explain it, so I was just curious.
I'll try my best. Which is, Zen is about kind of separating yourself from your mind and your ego, and you could imagine like clouds passing in a sky. Like, you become the observer, you become the awareness, and you are no longer you, the identity, you are the experience. And that's kind of what enlightenment is described as, is that your awareness becomes so free of your ego or your mind or whatever, that you're able to kind of merge your consciousness with a greater presence, or the greater collective, is one way that it could be described. And wait, I forgot, what was the second part of your question? Zen
that
and
was
like
really
the day-to-day?
because that also reminds me of what you were saying earlier about meditation, dissociating yourself. It seems to have a similar overlying theme with what Zen is, separating yourself from that and like just observing, and we'll get more into that later. But the second question I had was, what was this property like, and what was Stillpoint marketed as? Because obviously they're getting members. So what was it a legit business? Was this something that somebody just kind of had on a property? Or what was Stillpoint for people who might not, have watched the documentary, or who might not have heard of it?
Right. Well, just as a side note about Zen, like I'm never going to say that any like certain philosophy is bad. So I don't think Zen is bad. I don't think meditation is bad. It's just that these tools can be very easily used in a different direction that's not completely aligned with what your best interest could be.
100%.
So just saying that out the gate. And also, like, I have nothing against Christianity or anything like that. I respect everybody's spiritual journey, and I don't think there's a right or really a wrong way either. Okay,
no,
so
that, I think it's just because everything can be, we see inversion with everything, right? And so I think it's good to identify that how things can be twisted to be wrong or damaging or not for our benefit. That way we can discern how something is presented to us. If we're going to go sign up for a personal development workshop, it's almost how you were saying with dissociation. I feel like something like meditation, a lot of people used to connect with their inner self, where on the other hand, an abuser might use it and disconnect you and dissociate you from yourself, so I think just discerning that, it's good for people to see both sides. But keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So the property itself was a retreat center. It was really a gorgeous space. It was, I don't know how many acres, but it was large enough to where we had this big, beautiful house. We had separate housing for, because, I think there were several people that lived on the property. So we had a few like housing buildings. There was a big garden in the back and a pool that was like a saltwater pool and all organic food. And, and if you join the Sangha, you do forfeit your right to your own personal money, because you end up contributing most of your income to the group. But what you gain in return is like uh, an amazing organic diet and lots of physical exercise, and all of these meditation practices, which you assume are going to be very good for you. And some of them were like, I did learn a lot while I was there, and we did a lot of like Tai Chi and yoga and Qigong, and all sorts of interesting things happened there in my short time, and people lived there for longer than I did. But it was a beautiful place, and it was tucked away back in the mountains in Santa Cruz, so it was pretty isolated from the city itself. And it was in the redwood trees, so you could hike around the redwoods. It was lovely.
And so you could see how people, being introduced to that, who are seeking something like that doesn't come off to me. I'd never see something like that and think, oh, this is culty, like it looks evil and sinister. Something like that, you wouldn't think that there could be evil that lurks in an environment like that, And I think you're seeing it really paints the picture that duality. You could have something so beautiful presented to you, and behind the scenes, there's something really dark going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is, like you said, there is a documentary that was filmed about it. And I also have a video that I made that shows a little bit of the property as well, if you're curious and just want to see what it looks like. And the documentary is very eye-opening, because you really see how messed up that place was. Yeah.
I'll link all of that
Yeah.
below too for people, so that way they can go see that. And like I said, I encourage you guys to follow Chrystal regardless. Her channel is amazing. So I'll link all of that below. But so you're on this property, you're woofing, and talk about that transition of how you went from that to being recruited by Umi in that process.
It was really just a slope of me getting there, and my master's degree stuff's kind of slowly falling apart, because I just didn't put the energy I should have into it. And then I think I had been there maybe a few days, maybe I really don't even know how long I was there before he invited me to stay. And it was during one of the more private evening events. There would be public events where people could come listen to him, and then every night we would do like a private sangha with only the members there, or the woofers would be attending too. And usually he'd be, saying something wise about your inner truth, and, making you feel pretty high, kind of. And
Enjoy your prison.
yeah, it's a good line, right? It's so true. Yeah, and he like singled me out that day, and just, I don't even remember how he worded it, but he invited me to stay. And I thought about it for a day, I think. And when I said yes, it was like being welcomed into a family, kind of people's attitudes towards me changed in the group. My name was changed. I had to start wearing all blue. I, had to start participating in the routine and the rhythm. So, I was losing some freedoms, but also becoming more accepted and included, and, becoming part of the community. And I think at the time, it was just, I was at a time in my life where I didn't really know what I valued in terms of like what direction I wanted to take my life. And I knew I really valued my spiritual exploration. That part of my personality I wanted to continue developing. And it seemed like the right choice for me to, take that time to do something and go deeper into something that I valued.
Which it seems like a really logical thing. That's not a journey that you'd take expecting to end up in a cult, right? And that's why your story is so important, because I think everybody listening, to one degree or another, every human, we want to get better somehow, even if we all have different ways of going about it. There's a lot of ways that we can take that path. And a lot of it that isn't good is dressed as something that looks good and feels good and seems like a really great situation and seems like something that can benefit us. And this, for people listening, you just picture like a beautiful property, all organic food, a community of people who seem very loving. Everything looks as it should for something that would be good for us. It doesn't seem obvious, the red flags, they're just massaged in so well. So you get invited and you are so excited. You say yes. You are joined with open arms to this community who seems really excited to have you there. Why do you think, did they ever tell you, for example, like why you had to wear blue, or these little routines? Were there reasons why they said you had to do them? Or were these things more just expected and there wasn't really an opportunity for people to ask questions about it?
I mean, there was always an explanation for everything. Some of them a little more woo-woo than others, but like for example, wearing blue, it was said that the frequency of the color was a higher frequency, and by wearing it, you were raising your own frequency. And the point of like being around a guru is that the idea is that someone who's like broken through I'm just using their language, I'm not saying that's how it really was, but someone who's like broken through the shell of consciousness and is has such a high frequency field, you could be in their presence and you can start to kind of like vibrate in unison, and therefore you're surrendering and increasing your own awareness. And he would say stuff like that all the time. But generally like participating in the mundane day-to-day tasks, that was also a foundation of Zen, which was when you're doing these mundane things that you don't really want to do, and you surrender to this kind of lifestyle, you're giving yourself a chance to focus more on the present moment and less on the shoulds and shouldn'ts of the mind. And it's supposed to be help you gain better access to your inner spiritual self, your higher awarenesses. That's not a word. Higher awareness.
I think it is now. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if somebody was trying to do that for a good purpose, I don't think that's a bad thing to want to cultivate within yourself, right? But
Hey.
one of the things that you've mentioned on some of your other disclosures is, what if what you're being submissive to and observing is abusive?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it seems like in somebody or in a space that's encouraging a healthy connection to ourselves, it would be to be observant of the things that we shouldn't worry about and things that aren't dangerous, and to stop getting worked up about little things, right? Where in an unhealthy environment, the surrender is an all-around umbrella for everything. It doesn't matter if you're being abused, be submissive to it, observe it, don't react to it, let it happen, right? And it teaches you, I love how you say like your energetic boundaries are violated. And I think that I'd love for you to talk about what that means to you a little bit more, because I think that's a really important point to this and something a lot of us aren't in tune with.
Oh yeah, that's a big one because it's so subtle, it's like, because I was so used to living in that state of being where I was just like constantly submitting myself to other people's ideas and beliefs and patterns and like what I should do. And when, there were so many like ways that things were like micromanaged and controlled where you couldn't point to one big thing and say like that's really fucked up, but then these like small day-to-day violations would be constantly happening. For example, in the morning we would take turns being the morning wakers, where you'd have to wake up before everybody else, walk around ringing a little bell to wake everybody up, and then your job was to prepare the tea for the master and the sangha, and you had to heat every cup up before you put the tea in, and it had to be perfect. And if the tea was too cold, you got like really like shamed. It was just, there were so many examples where you were like put down and put so much shame and guilt on you for failing at this stupid shit. And um but it became surrendering to your ego, because I could say, oh, she shouldn't be criticizing me for something like that. And then if I would speak up, it would be my ego that's out of line, so it becomes kind of a mental trap where you're allowing this abusive cycle. And it was like a whole community around this master. So you can't really blame one person and say they were the dysfunctional one. It was just this pattern that kept repeating and, re-traumatizing everybody involved and making people participate unknowingly. And it's like Umi, I can see him now. Like when I look at him now and I look at videos, I can see that he is just like full of this like disgusting energy, and it's like predator vibes all over him. But at the time I was blind to that because I had so much conditioning around like not questioning enlightened masters. Like they got there and you have to respect that. And all the books I read, Osho talks about it, that submitting to a master is one of like the greatest gifts of life, and how dare I not take this opportunity. Yeah. Did I answer the question? I hope I did.
Yeah. What were some other things that you can look back now and say, gosh, that was dysfunctional that we did that? Or maybe even walk us through like what a day or a week there looked like and some of the things that they'd have you do.
Okay. So like just daily routine is that we had this very strict morning routine. We'd come in the morning, we do this like hour meditation. Sometimes it was different. Sometimes there was people in the Sangha would lead stuff. And then Umi would come in the mornings and we'd all meditate in silence together. And then the meals would happen in silence. So, we'd have these meals. And also during mealtime, it was so funny. Like just another example of this like weird dynamic that was going on, where at the meals at the big table, there's like a giant lazy Susan. And I guess there was an issue with people like taking turns without speaking. So Umi said that there has to be one person that turns the lazy Susan for everybody else. And the group interpreted that as one person just sits there and continually turns it without stopping for the entire meal. And I was the only one who was like, that's not what he meant. But I didn't say anything because I was too shy and submissive at the time. I didn't dare question. And so yeah, because there was just mealtime. And then we'd have like work. Either, there were days I was working at the time as a nanny, so I would go to work sometimes. Then I'd have chores to do around the garden. I'd help with the general upkeep of things. I built a chicken coop in my time there, so there was like time for creativity as well, which kind of kept me there longer, because there was creative expression that was valued and allowed, but only within certain parameters. And then in the evening there would be another meditation, sometimes a talk from Umi, and then every weekend there was like a satsang day, which was a bigger deal, where people would come in from the greater community to listen to him. And there was also a lot of cleaning. That was part of the daily rhythm routine, was making sure everything was always very perfectly clean. And when I left the cult and I allowed myself to not clean, like I allowed myself a little more mess. It was interesting, like when I left, just seeing what dynamics I was able to let go of. And then I really started to see how effed up things had been. Yeah.
And I know one of the things that you mentioned too was there was no privacy. Could you talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit too?
Yeah, the bathrooms were basically a free for all. So you could walk in on anybody at any time. And if someone had a problem with it, it was their problem, not yours. So I just like basically got used to peeing in front of people. And also the swimming pool, I don't think they forced you to swim nude, but I felt like you were expected to swim nude. And like if you were you were questioned if you had a problem with showing your body to strangers. It was your, your ego was in question then. Um, and then I know Umi had all sorts of workshops in his day. I heard about ones that happened way back when Maimuna was in his group, because we'll talk about her later, but like she was part of his Sangha, where he like had everybody naked together in the room for like the whole day, and he was like messing with everybody psychologically, and like had somebody break up with her husband in front of everybody, and like all this stuff that's just really weird. And he would say that he was just you were supposed to allow your ego to die. He was just chopping the ego off, and if you had a problem with it or didn't think it was the correct way, you were in the wrong, not him. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating too how ego is another word that can be so twisted and inverted, and ego isn't a bad thing. It's just if we can let it overtake us in one direction, but really there's like two parts to our ego. There's the like how you call somebody egotistical, where they seem really full of themselves, really selfish. But ego can also be like having a boundary or knowing who you are and like having certainty, certainty versus cockiness kind of, or confidence versus cockiness. And I think another red flag is just how ego as an umbrella is just something you absolutely want to get rid of. That if you ask a question of any kind and speak out, you have an ego, which they're labeling as something negative that you don't want, So I think that's really fascinating too, because I've read that a lot with different, if you read like, anything on Buddhism or anything with Zen, you see that word a lot. And it seems really easy to take on that belief that if you have a question, or just if you're curious, and we deserve to have questions, that there's something wrong with you if you're questioning anything that's happening, and it seems to like lack of privacy to me whenever I'm thinking about that almost seems on purpose. And I'm sure they had a lot of reasons maybe why, but so none of you could get privacy to talk about something potentially.
Interesting.
So like you started to have weird thoughts about something like, hey, this doesn't seem right. You can't really ever have a time where you're certain that you can talk to somebody in private, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but that was what came to mind, was like, gosh, well, how does anybody disclose anything if something bad's happening, if you never know who's looking around the corner, if you never have any sacred space, somebody can walk in your room while you're with your boyfriend, which I think actually happened to you, which we can talk about that too. But like, like you don't even get any type of privacy. So let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about some of like how were relationships on this property, and let's talk about this guy that ended up, being your boyfriend, and maybe we can segue that. I don't know what happened first, if Umi passed away while you were with this guy, or maybe we could tie in that part, what ended up happening with Umi, and about this guy that you met.
Okay. Yeah, and just as a disclaimer, like I don't want anybody to like think I'm attacking them, or I don't want to, it's just kind of what happened. Like I said, I'm not trying to bash this person, but so yeah, while I was a woofer there, while Umi was still alive, he was policing my romantic relationships, because new woofers would come in, and I did romantically connect with a couple of them, and he would admittedly kick them out after seeing those connections happen. And I know that because like the second time it happened, I was upset about it, and he invited me in to like have a talk with him. Or actually, I may have requested to talk to him, I think, because you could request to have a sit with the master, and I may have asked to talk to him about it. And he ends up like lecturing me on how boys will do anything to get laid. Is basically what he like, it was like, just like, okay. But Umi passed away, and then a new woofer came in. I think Umi was already dead when the new woofer came in, but it was very, very close. Or he was there for the very end. Umi might have already been in the process of dying when he came in.
Okay.
Because he might have been there for the funeral. But it was like, literally, I was in the office because I was involved in the administration of running the nonprofit, because it was under like a nonprofit umbrella, and technically a church too, under the umbrella of every legal thing. So I was helping with administrative stuff, and I think I talked to him on the phone, and we were literally like talking about needing a woofer, and the phone rang, and it was him, and he came, and there was, I'm gonna like tell this story. I don't want to sound crazy, but once you get into like spiritual stuff, things start to sound woo-woo, and it's okay if you guys don't align with it or think it's how things went down. But it all kind of happened together, where this guy came in. We'll call him, I won't use his name. We all had spiritual names, but I'll just leave it at that. He decided to join the Sangha. Umi had died, and Maimuna was coming in all at the same time. And the guy was very, very interested in Maimuna. You could tell, not only like as a teacher, but also more so like romantically. There were very strong vibes there. And then one day, things shifted between me and him. I thought he was cute, but I wasn't pursuing anything. And then one day, like, I could feel the energy between us change very dramatically. And we were sitting on the couch together watching a film. And then we went into meditation, and it was a dancing meditation at the time. And we ended up dancing together in this romantic way. And later, Maimuna, the new cult leader, Maimuna, admitted to me that she had gone into our energy bodies and changed something so that between me and the guy, so that we would come together. And I confronted her about it later, and she said that she had asked my higher self for permission, and I had granted her permission. And so it's like this like weird spiritual gaslighting. I kind of hate that word because everyone uses it now, but you know what I mean? Like,
It's true.
it's just these like weird things would go down that you didn't really have any footing to argue against. So I'm like, oh, well, okay, I guess my higher self said it was fine. So what can I say?
So it's fine.
But yeah, it thus began the very fucked up triangle of him, me, and Maimuna, which was basically like ran the whole course of my time being a student of hers, because she took over after Umi died.
And let's talk about her. So talk about what her place was before Umi. And then
Okay.
let's kind of tie this transition of her taking over at the same time that you are starting to court this new guy. Because I feel like it all started to happen at the same time, and all the pieces go together in such a really weird way.
Yeah. And once again, I'm trying not to bash anybody. So like I'm not trying to say that Maimuna is, I don't even know what to say about her, because it was such a complicated relationship. But I understand my role in it. I take completely responsibility for participating in the cult dynamic before and with her, because you know I was participating in it knowingly. Although, you know, you can understand how I got there, but
It's like knowingly, but not consciously necessarily, because you don't know. Yeah.
Because if I was conscious of what I am now, I would have never walked in or participated in that. So yeah, Maimuna came in, and the group started to shift around her. She had been a former student of Umi's, and while I would say about 10 years prior, I think, and while she was there, she had her awakening, which was, you know, could be described as she like pushed through all of her energetic chakras, basically like blew her head chakra out, became like super psychic, and awakened to other dimensional realities, and, you know, declared herself enlightened, and, you know, declared herself to be superior in so many ways. But so she had this awakening, but it was from what I understand, I can't speak to her real experience. From what I understand, she did so much. I don't know if you know about breath work, but it's a kind of breathing meditation that like literally forces your energy body open. And I think she was doing a ton of breath work, and she kind of forced herself to have this spiritual explosion, and it shattered her energy body. And she took like years just like recovering, is what she says. She said she couldn't even function in society because of how awake she was. And that reminds me a lot of how Teal Swan would talk, where she's so awake and so enlightened that you have to plug in the appliance for her because she can't do it. Wait, oh no, I'm sorry. That was related to her trauma patterning. No, wrong conclusion. But Teal does have this vibe where she's like, yeah, tell me someone who's more awake than me. And Maimuna would say the exact same shit. So I would laugh. I like laughed when I saw that recent Teal doc, the Hulu one. I forgot what it's called, something water, or the Deep End, I think. But yeah, so she got, after Umi died, the group was struggling because I don't think they were, Umi told the group to continue on with his message and his creation. And he said his spirit, his Bodhi field or his Buddha field, whatever it was, would still be at that space. And he wanted the group to continue there and, you know, keep playing his songs because they were all recorded on audio. So what ended up happening is like, you know, people were still meeting and we were all listening to his words, and things were just kind of, you could tell that it just wasn't going to keep going this way. So they invited Maimuna in because they knew she was awake. And Maimuna came in with her twin sister. She was wearing all black and her twin was wearing all white. What? I think it was just weird. Like she came in all black with this like very intense presence, and you could tell that she was ready to like tear down the patriarchy, which my soul was like, hell yeah, let's do it. I was so sick of the structure that Umi had. I wanted, it was all false and needed to go. And Maimuna came and started tearing it down. And I got so enamored with her because she was helping me undo all of this like cult programming. But what happened was like, it was kind of like a trauma bond where I just got kind of bonded to her instead. And we can talk about this more, but I think she would say that it's that I bonded to her and she's like the neutral party and she didn't do anything. And, you know, why don't I be the adult about it? But really what happened is that she was kind of knowingly or unknowingly creating a new group around her.
What was the vibe too after Umi died? Were people really sad? And do you think that was kind of a common thing, that you're in mourning, you're grieving,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whether or not like you had a really close relationship? It seems like this guy is like, Umi was a very big part of your lives. And so I would think that like everybody's almost trauma bonding and looking for somebody to almost fill that again, because that was kind of the connection that all of you had was to Umi. And without that, you know, now what, right? Like, who do we look to now? Who's going to help us heal and keep going and evolve and awaken?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a very sad environment for a while. And especially because, you know, Umi's wife was a big part of that group, and watching her process was very hard. And, you know, also it was really hard for her when Maimuna came in and started wanting to break down what Umi had said we should keep. And there was another interesting thing that happened, like right after Umi died. I was sleeping in the public space, like it was like a public space, sleeping space with beds and like little shoji screen partitions. And so again, not a lot of privacy. And I was like in dream state and I got yanked out of my body. Like I've never experienced this before, but like I was like literally like on the floor, but my body was in bed, but I was on the floor. And like this being was wrestling with me and like trying to pull me out. And that happened a couple times in a row at night. And then, but Maimuna was already there and she came in and helped me rearrange the room and kind of like cut that energy, tell it to leave. And it felt like Umi. And I'm not saying it was, but I think it was Umi coming in and just like being like, get the fuck out of your body. I've been trying to do this for, you know, trying to get you to do this forever. I'm going to do it for you. But it was weird. So like shit that I've never experienced, but definitely I think when you start messing with these kind of energies, you start to have weird experiences.
I think
Yeah, but
like we know that magic exists, that's very
Mhm.
common with people who mess around with that side of it. So I don't think people listening will think that's weird, because there's been a lot of weird things that people have disclosed on here, and it's like, gosh, at this point, is it any coincidence? Like, how can anybody now
Mhm.
not believe in that there's people out there that can manipulate our energies and the force fields around us or with other people? I really believe in that. I didn't used to, but I've just seen so many instances where it's like, it has to be real. It's just we're not
Yeah.
taught about it, right? But go on with what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Oh yeah, it's I there was a lot of he would do a lot of mind reading. I think that's another big trap of how you get sucked into these groups and why I want to talk about it, because I was naive at the time. I had this thought process that, oh, if somebody is displaying these really amazing attributes, like Umi would read my mind in the middle of a song and look at me and answer my thought, like um he was talking about, someone could say he assumed this, which is, what people would say, but he was talking about him dying, and he looked at me because I was thinking like, oh, if he's so enlightened, why is he dying of cancer? And he looked at me and was like, oh, well, I worked on these radioactive ships for so long, and that's why I have cancer.
Oh my gosh.
I know. So like shit like that would happen all the time. So I knew he was psychic, and I knew there was stuff going on that I didn't quite fully understand, and that's kind of what kept me coming back for more, because I wanted to. They said they knew how to navigate those spaces and that they had the answers for how to evolve spiritually, and I wanted to know. I was like super curious, and um, yeah.
Now, did oh my goodness, Mayuma, these names are so crazy.
I
Did
know my Muna.
Maimuna, yes. Now, did she have some of these same qualities also that really made her a good shoe-in for Umi after he passed?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say more so actually. I'm assuming, I really don't know, honestly, but I'm assuming that she was a little more advanced in a lot of ways. It felt like it was kind of like things were reorganizing and getting updated. So, you know, the old top-down system wasn't working anymore, and here she came in bringing in more of a feminine dynamic. Also being super psychic and, being able to work with these unseen energies, and there there were times when I experienced that for myself, like, without a doubt. And she spoke my language because, I'm also like a super witchy person, not like the evil witch side, which gets construed, and especially in the survivor circles, there's so many people who think that, it's kind of been taught that all magic is evil, and that, if you're claiming that for yourself, that you are going with the dark side. And I don't agree with that at all. And um just so like these magical ideas, for lack of a better word, were so true to my own heart, and the divine feminine and all of these things she was talking about made me want to continue my work with her. um
And what
and
what were some of the things that did change when she stepped in? How did the group react? Did it seem to mend the morale and people felt excited again? And then what were some of the things that she came in and changed around that was different under her master leadership?
Oh, yeah, it was a very mixed bag of emotions for everybody. Quite an adjustment phase, and a lot of people did end up leaving, or it was just like got to be a smaller and smaller group. But what she started to do was like do away with the routine. I remember, even just for me, like physical action in space is very important. So even the physical act of changing the holy meditation room and taking down his pedestal and moving his urn, and we actually ended up I don't even know if I can say what we did with his urn because it's not technically legal. So I don't know if I will. But we we ended up
Use your
doing, you know, like
imagination,
doing something with
everyone.
Umi's ashes. Huh?
I said, use your imagination, everyone.
Yeah, we did something not very legal with Umi's ashes, the whole darn urn, which was like a breakthrough that she even got us to, you know, because it was such a holy relic, this urn. And so things like that, like, you know, the routine started to dissolve. We stopped wearing blue at my request. I was one of the first people who was like, can we stop wearing blue? And I got questioned and shamed for wanting that, you know, and yeah, little by little, then you know, it just, we realized that the Still Point property just wasn't sustainable. So we sold the property, continued on under the umbrella of the nonprofit, and just brought in my Muna as the new teacher.
Was it still called Still Point, or did it get rebranded to be a different name?
It got rebranded, and I'm trying to remember what it was. We were officially called the Church of Consciousness, and I'm wondering if we kept that, but just dropped Still Point. I can't really remember. But my Muna didn't want to be associated with Still Point as a brand. So, you know, at the time that documentary was being filmed, and she was already involved while that documentary was being filmed, but she refused to have any part of it. You know, she didn't want her presence to be known. So what ended up happening was that like a small core of us stayed on as her students and took that entity of the nonprofit and moved closer to where she was living, which was closer to like San Francisco area, but not in the city, more out of there, but around that area, like the Bay Area. And thus began the very strange next year of like being in her cult. And I can call it a cult. I know she wouldn't call it a cult. And I understand that she would not perceive it that way, and I don't really expect her to. But the behavior and the actions and the control and the drama, it was very cult-like.
Well, it's interesting because it seemed like she would be this hero to come in and stop all of it, you know, and it essentially just took a different form, but it was a very similar type of environment where you didn't have more control or more sovereignty or more of anything, that maybe people that continue to follow her did so thinking they'd receive. What was that like going on this new property, and what were some of the things that she started to maybe enforce or want you guys to do?
It was so it's different because what ended up happening is like the little core of us, I think there was like 4 or 5 of us shifting here and there, maybe up to 6 sometimes. We moved into just a little house by ourselves, and we weren't living with my Muna. So already things were just a lot more separate, and you know, but how it would work is like we would have regular meetings with her, and her philosophy was a lot different. She focused more on, instead of the Zen, which was very cut and dry, her philosophy was focusing more on shadow work, which is a very big idea in the spiritual community and is very valuable. But what I saw with her work, and also with Teal Swan's work, which just Teal resonates, is so similar to my Muna, which is why I bring her up. It's like almost the exact same person. I don't know, in some ways. But this like shadow work just kind of became this very self-policing, constant, never-ending digging act, like mental digging act. And we were never good enough. We were never, you know, our unconscious energies were already always affecting her because she was so sensitive and awake. So I would always get blamed for like not being in the right alignment, and her feeling it and getting mad about it. And it, you know, and Teal would say the same shit, and it became so emotionally exhausting and mentally damaging because I was like caving in, you know, my whole emotional body was getting smaller and smaller, and I was feeling less and less in control. And
And
but
I mean,
you
you
know,
were just abused for a while under Umi, and so you're already broken down. Then you go through a death, it's like all these little micro traumas and then a big trauma. And
Mhm.
now it's like, you're already so vulnerable after going through all of that too.
Yeah, and it kind of, things kind of flowed. So I just like went with the river of the motion. I could have left, but I didn't because my Muna had so many good qualities to her that really aligned with what I was looking for. Because there were so many like positive experiences. It seemed positive because they were like playful and adventurous and exciting. And she could be very like vibrant and personable, but then she could also get very angry at the twist of a hat. And if you questioned her in any way, you got the full wrath of her anger. And like, how dare you question her because she's more enlightened than you are. And um it it just like continued in various forms of that cycle.
And at the
Yeah.
same time, so you're still continuing this relationship that happened right around the time of Umi's death. I'd love
Hmm.
for you to talk a little bit about that triangle that was happening, and then how what was kind of manifesting after she took over, and how that impacted your relationship.
Yeah, I mean, basically from the beginning, it was already understood that he was sexually attracted to her, but she was never going to pursue it. Like that was made clear. So what ended up going on, conspiring, was that like there was this like sexual tension between them where she was constantly bringing him in and there were times when she pulled me aside and said, I'm going to have him come live with me and like certain things that and you can't come, stuff like that where it was like you couldn't. I don't even talk about this. There were so many times where we'd be getting super intimate in these I don't know, healing sessions, sessions with her would be like digging deep into spiritual and shadow work and facing the inner truth, which is never pretty. Like, so that's how kind of things get allowed, is because you're saying, oh, well, it's not pretty and you have to face it. So let's go ahead and do this really uncomfortable and strange scenario. Um, uh, it's hard to describe, but basically, we were dating and he even proposed to me out of the blue. I didn't expect it. And then he kind of got kicked out by my Muna and had to go back home. And then he ended up, while he was gone, things between me and her were a lot easier because the tension of him being there was gone, because it was just constantly,
That's weird.
the relationship between me and him was never safe. It was constantly like she was constantly there. Um, and like she would come, we'd be in bed together and she would come in and like tell me to go make her some tea. And like, and I think she would say like, oh, I had to break you guys up because you guys were affecting my, like I could feel you. I don't know. It's just
So
like,
weird. It's like instead of them cheating, she would just try to somehow be involved in all of your intimate moments. But because she's not sleeping with him, you're not supposed to question the violation. And that would be hard to, because
mhm,
that's what would go through my mind if I'm already like really hurt, just in a vulnerable space, maybe not super in touch with myself or my boundaries. To me, I would question that and be like, well, they're not sleeping together. They've been very transparent with me about their relationship and just what that looks like and how nothing's going to happen. So the
mhm,
problem must be me, because they've already been honest about everything, and I shouldn't worry, none of that I should worry about. It's my ego. I could see that going on in my head and being like, yeah, he's not abusing anybody. Like, and I know that the relationship did end up being abusive, but even, it's hard to identify that sometimes whenever you're in it, and I think that that was really a situation that a lot of women, especially, I think, are listening to you and being like, gosh, I've gone through that so many times with a guy where I didn't feel good in my
mhm.
spirit. My heart didn't feel good, but I justified it because he wasn't cheating on me. They weren't
Right.
touching each other. So the problem must be me.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's so hard to talk about it because everything was like so nebulous and like it was just like a lot of moments that even now, because it happened a long time ago, all of that was probably like 9 years ago now when I actually because I got kicked out essentially. And um, when I left, it was just her and him left. And it was heartbreaking and really, really, really weird. Um,
How did that end up happening?
so like I'd say the last month, it was like I was just being slowly more and more excluded from the group. And there were like little tests for me that for example, and they were always, it was like a high stake test. So she like invited me to join this workshop. I forgot the topic. It might have been Qigong or something, or some energy work workshop. And I agreed to participate, and then ended up, because I was there, like $5,000 were put under my name. Like, I don't know, like because I agreed to participate, that much money was going into it. And then Maimuna decided that it wasn't in alignment for me to participate. And then it was my fault that I had said yes. And, so it was like I was kind of getting singled out. They would have meetings together without inviting me. And then finally one day I'm like on the road with my bike, and I run into her, and she informs me that they just decided to kick me out. And she wasn't going to tell me. She was going to let the asshole ex-boyfriend tell me. He was a jerk. Like, he wasn't a kind person, and he was going to be a dick about it. And she was going to knowingly let him tell me, after all we've been through, she wasn't just going to do the respectful thing and have that conversation with me. Luckily, God brought us together, and she's the one who broke me the news to me. And I had nowhere to go. I had to sell my car and buy a plane ticket and go back to Germany, where my parents were still living. And I could have stayed in. This was all in California, so I could have stayed there, but it wasn't. It just wasn't worth it, and it was time to. I don't know. It was right for me to go back to Germany. And she'll say that, like, she says that in the Facebook message that we can talk about later, that she sent me home to my family. So what's the problem?
Oh, nice of her.
I know. So kind of you to draw me all through that just to send me home. I appreciate it.
Oh my goodness. And so you go to Germany, and at any point while you're going through this, had it crossed your mind yet? And you've mentioned a couple times so far that like they didn't necessarily, you were asking questions. So to some degree, while some other people might not have had any discernment, it seems like your unconscious mind knew, like a part of you knew something felt off. But again, the group think, you're in an environment that seems like it's positive. Nothing outwardly seems abusive if you don't know what covert abuse looks like, right? Did you at any point talk to people who were coming in after they left saying, oh my gosh, this is a cult, get out? Or did you have any type of thought process during your years there that there was something really, really wrong?
Only in retrospect. Like, I know when Umi died, I could see clearly that system was corrupt. Like, I was so happy that it was getting torn down. And I was like one of the first people in that group to be like, that was really not healthy or good or healing, any of that. That was not okay. And hold on, I have to track. What else did you ask me?
I guess you answered the question. So I guess my next question, just in regards to that, when did those thoughts start coming up? Was it in Germany then? And what spawned you to be like, whoa, I knew that things weren't right, but it was really not right. And like, what helped you kind of become more conscious of what you actually went through?
You know, at the time, it took me a long time, because with me and Maimuna, we kind of continued to have a relationship even after she kicked me out, to where, like there were a couple of years where we didn't do a lot of exchange, but then a few years later we started working together again, where I was entering more of a student relationship with her. And then later it evolved into me recording YouTube videos with her and like trying to help her brand get off the ground as a spiritual teacher. And so it didn't even really, I didn't understand how messed up the dynamic with her was until when 2019 started, and no, 2020 started, and I was it was kind of like a bunch of dominoes that fell all in place, where I was awakening to the insane level of horror and corruption on our earth. And I was seeing how Teal Swan, who I had originally been looking at, and I had been watching her videos with interest because I liked, similar to Maimuna, she does use a lot of truth in her videos.
Yeah.
And so I was watching a lot of Teal Swan stuff, and I was starting to understand that Teal was corrupt. And then I was starting to understand that Maimuna's behavior was also really questionable. And the final straw for me was, we were doing business together. I was starting to record YouTube videos with her. This was like 2019, 2020. And she still has my ex-boyfriend there with her. They're still living together. And she invites him to be a part of the like new video project. And I start talking, I'm talking with him, and I can tell he's way out of alignment. Like he's not going to serve this project at all. And I tell her, I'm like, and we had already had so many conversations where I had brought to her my concerns, my feelings. I would say, hey, this wasn't okay how you treated me. And she would apologize and things would get better. So again, I brought this concern to her. I said, hey, this doesn't feel right that we're bringing back in this guy, because he had already caused a lot of issues in the past few years, just, it wasn't, so, I voiced my concerns, and she got super mad at me and like got really puffed up and like, how dare you question this? And she threw all this anger at me, and that really helped me. That was like the final straw. I was like, oh, she's insane. And it's so tricky in spiritual groups, because if you look at her material now, like she's saying a lot of very true things, but in the spiritual community, there's so much freaking deception, because you start to get into these grander ideas of how things could be operating, and people start to say things that sound true, but you don't understand that their behavior behind the screen is not aligned with the message that they're telling you. And she proclaims to support divine femininity and want the world to realign in 5D, because oh yay, we're all ascending, and all of these like spiritual mental traps that we're being fed, which I think is all deception. And so she's kind of there still doing her thing, and I'm just starting to be able to see through that, see through the message versus the behavior and the action, and how you can say a lot of pretty things and know a lot about reality, but if you're not aligned with your behavior, it doesn't make any sense. And I'm not trying to bash her, like I said, but I do want to speak up about my experience, because it doesn't, being enlightened doesn't let you just be an asshole. It doesn't excuse that behavior. And I think a lot of people are getting unknowingly trapped in these certain situations or certain relationships where things look very aligned and they sound really good for a long time. But I just want to kind of bring out that message that, if people aren't behaving the way that you would behave, like if I think about how I personally would have handled a lot of our communications and how I would have treated her if the roles were reversed, things would have been way different. And I've been giving her a lot of excuses because, she's just a fire Kali goddess, and she's here to just destroy and she's a spiritual cleaner, and so she gets to have the excuses to act the way she does.
Well, it's interesting just in general, we are taught since we're young with celebrities, with, gurus, you can call them a million different things, but society tells us to put people on pedestals. Oh, they're a CEO, they're higher than everybody else, they're above you, right? Everything's tiered in a hierarchy, and that which mimics what happens in a cult, right? But because we don't look at a business or a CEO or a courtroom or a personal development or Zen community as a cult, like we are just trained since we're young to look at things with a hierarchy and to put people on pedestals. And so I think it primes us to not recognize when abusers are in that role, right? And to
Yes.
realize that, hey, that's a really weird concept that one human, because they're of an experience, because of a label, because of something, because of age, because they worked with somebody, that they're above me, right? And that somebody is out there thinking that they're above other people. I think that in itself is a huge red flag that we're not trained about, because it goes against every belief system that we're given as a child, as a teenager, even in our adult lives. We're taught to respect CEOs, which we should if they're good. I'm not saying that structure is bad. I'm just saying that, again, the duality or the dichotomy of it, what is the intention behind it? Is somebody in a higher position because they're leading, but you'd never know that they're in a higher position? Or is it known that this person is above everybody, and with this person you never ask questions? Like, there's a very distinct difference. And I think with your situation, it blends in so well with just what we're taught. It's not somebody that other people look at as abusive. It's somebody that comes off as very warm and maybe charismatic, maybe enlightened, right? And somebody that might be easy to look up to. But again, it's that morality of like, why should somebody be above me? You'd think if somebody cared about me, they'd treat me as their equal, right? Or they'd admire me almost how I admire them. And again, not that we should put people on pedestals, but it's like, usually when you genuinely love and care about somebody, like, you want to serve them, you want to come down on their level and like be with them, right? You don't look at somebody you love and say, oh, well, because I love you and you love me, I'm above you, right? So I think it's just, it brings to light something so common that for me, you look at the whole personal development world. I think that's something we should be asking questions about with everybody, with the Teal Swans, with the Tony Robbins. And again, I'm not trying to offend anybody who might follow these people. I'm just saying, what is the position that this leader is, dictating over you? Are they your equal, or are they above you, right?
And once again, like, the words might not match the action. So if you like, maybe could I show the Facebook comment she made?
Absolutely.
Because it's
Yeah.
just an illustration. And my only intent is to give an example of how things could be reworded to negate your own personal experience. So, if anyone else is feeling like they're in a similar boat and they're just like getting similar wordage, you might want to. So what happened, long story short, is that, for the last year, I have had this YouTube channel, and I did one interview with another survivor named Rachel, and we go in depth about that cult time. And because I left a comment on one of her videos a little anonymously, she found my video and then posted on her Facebook page that I was slandering her, basically, which I think is a bit of an exaggeration. But okay, hold on. I'm gonna try to do this. I'm sorry. So I'm gonna share screen. Okay. So my Mona posted 2 days ago. Someone tried to slander my YouTube page today, like I was a guru cultist teaching Zen, a bad parent with an ex-cult member named Chrystal. That's me. A third generational descendant from Osho, which is interesting because I would never describe myself as a descendant of Osho. Like, I don't align with his teaching at all.
Yeah, it's a weird label.
But it's weird that she said that. And she did her best to help me at the time. And she said, hey, I got her out of the cult life and back to her family. What's the problem? So, as I've already described, like, it was a lot more than that going on. She continues, okay, let me explain. I don't have students or teachings. That's a lie. The wisdom I share is that from my own experience, and I share tools that have helped me. Years ago, I was hired to take down the cult, a church called the Church of Consciousness. The leader, Umi Lodge, had amazing transmission and did his best. That's shocking to me that she calls it an amazing transmission, because he was a disgusting predator. And I know from things I've heard that he was also sexually abusing people. So I don't know what the fuck line you're drawing there, but that's no amazing transmission when you're sexually abusing people. And he did his best. I was called back to clean up his deal upon passing, and I did my best to clean up his life's work, but his students took it and did weird things with it. So it's our fault, not, you know.
Of course.
I was hired back because he knew I'd burn it to the ground and leave no ego standing. What a thing, right? I did this, but the egos that think they are in charge and are narcissists, which is why I'm reposting my site. She links her website in this. I'm the super empath on my dojo. My work has only me 5D, divine feminine. I welcome all, but this dojo is for the socio and economic balance and the support of our humanity's sovereignty. And there it goes further, but just like this is the kind of language that a lot of these spiritual teachers use, where it kind of just, I don't know, it kind of redirects the accusation where it no longer becomes her problem that she had this really fucked up behavior, was really violating all sorts of boundaries, controlling, blaming, and then just to hear her talk about that she was doing good, and that it was her job to be, you know, clean up Umi's mess, which, and she did. I mean, that's why I liked her, because she was cleaning up Umi's bullshit. And that's why I stayed with her for so long. But on the flip side of that,
I think
yeah.
it shows a different perspective of, and again, this word does get overplayed, but it's something every survivor of anything that discloses publicly talks about. They get gaslit. They get people that want the things that they have done or things that people they're affiliated with to stay hidden. So they, instead of maybe trying to understand or having a conversation, things that maybe normal people would do if this is true, they go on the offense immediately, right? And they go and attack the person that's calling them out. And I think people watching and listening that have followed me will see this as such a strategy in the playbook of how, of a way of trying to discredit somebody disclosing abuse. And to see how easy it is to for the abuser to do so with the words that they use to sound very compelling and believable to maybe whoever's reading this, right? If somebody didn't know Chrystal and they're a devout follower of Maimuna, right? It'd be easy to read this seeing only her perspective if you're sucked into this group think mindset, and to almost feel bad for her, like, gosh, you did do all of this stuff, right? As an outsider looking in, wow, look at all that, look at all those things that she did, and she is so enlightened, so how could somebody do this to her, right? And I just want to stress, like, this is such a common thing to see, and they do it in a way that makes them sound sane, and it gaslights the person who had a really bad experience. You know, and I'm sorry that this happened to you, and I appreciate you sharing it, because it just, time and time again, it's all different ways that this happens, whether it's attacking my YouTube channel, making a post like she did on Facebook, right? There's always that reaction from an abuser that they have to do something to justify and gaslight their victims.
Yeah. And it's, you know, like using the word abuser is really hard for me because, like,
Yeah.
I feel like it's not, although it's true, her behavior was abusive. It's hard for me to say she was an abuser because it just feels too dramatic, you know? It's
Yeah.
just like,
And for
but
her,
it's,
she might not even be conscious of it, you know,
yeah.
this could be something she genuinely believes in, that she genuinely believes she's helping people, you know, and so
Yes.
I'm not trying to tear her down either. More so just using it as a generality, just that this is pretty common.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's the reason I wanted to talk about it, is because I think it's happening a lot where there are people like Maimuna who have gained certain abilities, you know, they're a little more advanced in certain parts, as certain aspects of their spirituality are more advanced, but they're missing a crucial piece that is allowing them to justify really unhealthy or very dysfunctional behavior. And then because they are so spiritually evolved, they're able to kind of mask it and, you know, shift the blame and make it not about them. And they're not able to recognize that what they're doing is not appropriate, because it kind of gets swept under the rug of, well, truth is hard, and spirituality is sitting in the fire and facing the hard things and shadow work, and it just lends to accepting this really dysfunctional relationship dynamic. So, I'll just say that if you are interested in understanding her style, you can go to her YouTube page and see. It's very similar to a lot of other spiritual teachers where they're talking about different topics. And um, I just wanted to bring to people's awareness that what she says and how she says things may sound very authentic and in alignment with you, and you may have the interest to want to get more information from this person. But I just wanted to tell my story as a kind of behind the scenes view of how teachers like this can operate. And I think it's very important because so many of us are starting to really, there is really a global awakening that is happening, and there is truth to that. But I think that at each level of awakening, there's just new layers of deception that we want to be ready for. And, I think Maimuna is very self-deceptive, and is because she's unaware of her own unhealthy dynamics. They're able to be, how do I word this? People are able to kind of work with her unknowingly. And yeah, well, once again, I'm trying to talk about this without bashing her or slandering her, because that's not my goal in all of this at all. It's just to talk about my story,
And
and
it's
that
your
it
story.
wasn't okay for me.
I mean, I think you're doing a great job because you're talking about your personal experience and you're not bashing her, which is so nice of you,
Mm,
because I'm sure there are people out there who might be really bashing her, and, maybe it's rightfully so that they are. But either way, I appreciate that, because I think that's the natural reaction for people on the outside to think whenever they hear about somebody like that, is to be really mad and mean.
mhm.
And again, I don't want to excuse bad behavior, but we do have to realize that a lot of things that we could consider to be abuse, or, maybe not treating somebody good, is generational. It's kind of funny she used that word,
Yeah,
because it does get passed down and it becomes something that we're no longer conscious to. It becomes normal for us. And I don't mean us as in people listening, I mean us as in the people who partake in that. It can be something that they're not even consciously aware that they're doing. And
right.
there's a
Yeah.
difference. Like, we have to call out bad behavior, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is consciously trying to hurt people.
Yes.
You're doing a great job defining that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it's not constructive to, bring this out to public awareness and then have the public respond in a negative way, or to I don't want anything like that to happen. It's more just like providing information, and especially around Still Point too, because there's there's very little evidence of that time. There's a documentary, but that documentary is very one-sided, and the creator of it does uplift Umi in a lot of ways and make the space look and sound better than it is. And I do want to be fair to her. There are a couple parts in the doc that do show Umi to be a little bit entitled. But the overall message is very positive. And so, I wanted to bring my perspective in. And for now, my perspective, the video that I created is still available, but I think the creator of the documentary is not very pleased with my video, and so feel free to observe it while it's still around. I don't know how that's going to go. Um, but I just want people to know about this really random little cult that lived and died and remorphed, and how these dynamics keep happening. And especially in the survivor community, there's so many people in it that are perpetuating the trauma that the survivors went through, and then getting sucked into new forms of deception. And I'm not advocating for living in hypervigilance or being afraid of trusting ever again, rather just understanding that it's very easy to be deceived, especially when you're trying to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned too, during the time whenever it was Still Point with Umi there were allegations of sexual abuse potentially. Was that something that you were aware of then, or also is that something that came out later also?
Yeah, that was after he had passed. Yeah.
Oh,
And I don't want to say any more details about it because it's
sure.
people's personal stories, but yeah, just knowing that he was like having multiple partners and also was being non-consensual, so I could use other words for it, but I'm just going to say it as gracefully as that. um and I don't, you know it just makes my stomach churn. I feel like it's very common, and you see it in a lot of our world leaders where it somehow goes hand in hand, this like predator lifestyle. Yeah.
Talk about that aspect for a little bit, because you do a really good job taking a localized situation like what happened at Still Point and blowing it up and helping people understand how this behavior really exists everywhere. What
Hmm.
started to, you said whenever COVID happened, you started to look at the world a little bit differently. What were some of the ways that you think your experience shaped how you reacted to what was happening in the world? And what did you see?
Well, yeah, like when COVID and stuff started, um, I'm like, is that even a hot word anymore? YouTube
I
doesn't care
know.
anymore, does it?
I think they care about this word, but I think
Uh,
I hear COVID all the time. So
okay, yeah, good, good. I know. Um, it's so funny. It's been 3 years, everybody.
I
Chill
know.
out.
Chill out.
Yeah, so like when COVID started, I was like, this doesn't feel right. This feels very familiar. This feels a lot like my cult abuse. And but it was just different. It was different shapes and forms. But I already had an uneasy feeling when things started to unfold. And at that time I was still talking to my Muna. So it was kind of all happening at once, where I was starting to recognize that my Muna was not a healthy or like balanced person. And I was starting to realize that like um, the level of deceit wasn't just like for blatant control, but what really hit the nail on the head, what really hit the nail on the head was understanding the level of like horrific child abuse that's going on. And like this is how I found you, because you were just such a champion for these survivor stories. And um when I started digging deeper and deeper into any information I could get on it, um, I started to see the same patterns of, leaders portraying themselves to be acting in the benefit of all, or, I just started to see through the lie. And there were a lot of systems, still mental systems in my head that I had trusted, like medicine, for example. I had still trusted that overall it was a good system. I had kind of viewed it a little differently. I thought like overall things were fine, but there were a few corrupt pieces here and there. Then I started to realize actually the entire system, the corruption is the greater reality. And instead there's like little light workers here and there that are just like trying to bring in what they can. Um, and yeah, it just felt so familiar. And because I had gone through the cult stuff, like I had really no more fucks to give. And then when I realized that it was like that child abuse was a really big part of this system, I had even less fucks to give and just like started trying to get my message across. I think like the reality of satanic ritual abuse was really tied deeply into the cult dynamics as well, because like I was able to like psychologically, mentally understand already how something like this could happen. But the seeing like the prevalence of SRA and me being able to cognitively process that it is very possible and can occur, because people can believe something that could to be true and perpetuate such a horrific act, can live in such a level of delusion and still function in the world and be a world leader and create global systems, and all this stuff started to fall into place. And yeah, and then I just had to start talking about it, because I was hoping that if more people understood that I didn't trust the way things were going, not because I was repurposing my cult trauma in a new form, which is what a lot of my friends assumed, is like, oh, I was a cult survivor, so now I'm just like pattern matching and being like, guys, there's cults everywhere, even though they would say like I'm being
No, they are.
dramatic. There are. But people would assume that, just like, oh, she's just a little weird. She don't, take it with a grain of salt. But I just wanted to have people understand my process, and that it wasn't that I was pattern matching or projecting. It was that I had just already lived through some very minor forms of it, and I could recognize that predator dynamic very easily.
For people who, might, which a lot of people are, myself included, I've only known about all of this for, a few years, and I'm still learning so much, and so are a lot of the listeners. What are some characteristics that you would want to share to help people understand the dynamics of a cult? So if people are out there seeking things, they might have some tools to know what to look for and to discern against or for.
Mm. Well, like rule number one for me was like really start to connect to your heart space and like the internal alarm systems in your body, because they're different for everybody. But and they get really muddled because we all have life experiences that have really made it difficult to recognize those single signals and stuff. But if you start hearing these faint little voices that things are not right, I would take those very seriously. A lot of times, just in my experience, entering this like cult mentality, it becomes, hold on, let me think about this. It's, at first it seems very aligned and good, and then things will shift very suddenly, and where the behavior of the leader will shift abruptly, and the focus will come back on you and either be in a form of shame or accusation or guilt, something that's going to keep you feeling down and compliant, for lack of a better word, and still participating, I would say. And this like sense of grandiosity I would see a lot, and I was interpreting it as her being actually spiritually superior, because at the time I thought that was the case. And that's not a constructive way to think of things. I don't think that way anymore about things or people. But at the time I was like, oh, there are people who are gurus and she is one of them, and she's superior in this way. And she would say things that were very superior. Like she said that Britney Spears got famous when she awakened, and it was like her energy that like spread to Britney Spears and like led to her becoming famous. Like, like what the okay. That was like when Teal Swan says like, show me someone who's more enlightened than me. I was like, oh, that's something my moon would say. And so shit like that, like it gets really, at the time I just interpreted it differently as like, oh yeah, that's normal behavior for a guru. But really what I was ignoring the whole time was that my body was just telling me to get out of there. And even at the very end, before they kicked me out, I was breaking out in hives, and I'd never done that in my life before. Like I just didn't know where they were coming from, and they disappeared as soon as I left the cult.
Wow.
And so like listen to your body and your inner gut and your heart, and just keep reminding yourself that no matter what anybody says, nobody has a passage between you and spirit. Like that's direct in here, and nothing's going to change that. And if anyone's making you feel like shit, like they shouldn't be doing that. If they're caring and helpful and healing, no. And there's a difference between like, some sort of form of bullying versus like, facing, some teachers will bring you through a trauma healing, if you're working with a therapist or a coach, and you might feel bad, but it's not that that person is making you feel bad. It's that they're helping you through something. And so I know it can get very messy and hard to define sometimes. But if you do feel like you're in some sort of situation like that, I would remain as calm as you can. And like for me, I do believe that I was meant to go through this experience because it led me to where I am right now, and that I am able to participate in the survivor community and talk about these greater issues. And so it's not a mistake if you are there now. Like you're going to walk through it and you're going to grow. But maybe that moment of recognizing that it's time to walk away is super powerful. And if that's when you get there, you'll get there. Yeah.
That's really helpful, because I think I love how you say internal alarm system. I think that's like the perfect way to explain it. And I've never heard it called that before, but I think we sacrifice that a lot, and it's one of those things we're trained to even in school. Oh, you don't like this class? Too bad. Turn off that bad feeling that you shouldn't be here, or your teacher's bad, or your uncle, or whoever it is, and just go on with life, and a lot of times I think we end up crossing our own energetic boundaries, and shutting that off and saying, well, this doesn't seem like it's something bad. And so again, the problem must be me. Like I need to heal whatever it is in me that doesn't feel good. We do this in personal relationships. We end up being with people that don't feel good to us. We ignore that alarm system, right? And we get caught up in something that's not good for us. And I think just in general, like I think all of that advice can apply to so many avenues in life, but I think that's really important whenever we're joining a group or joining a community, just to understand, to have those boundaries firm before we end up going into something. Even if you're seeking something you don't know, right? If we don't have some type of a boundary within us, then how are we going to defend ourselves against something that crosses it if we can't even identify it, right?
Yeah.
Abusers know. And again, I hate, like, let's just say manipulative people or narcissistic people, abusers. There's a lot of different ways. I'm just in general, making a general statement, but it can be all those little things. But like they know people who don't have boundaries. That's something that people, seeking people to maybe admire them or get under their umbrella. If somebody's not a good person, they're going to know right away if your boundaries are down, right? It's really important that, I think that's like a huge step. If you're in line with what those boundaries are and like you keep firm with them, then that alone is going to really help, it's going to help you discern when your alarm system's going off. I think so many of us just turn that off. And so like, we know it's something that doesn't feel good, but we're so not aligned with what we stand for that it's really hard to figure that piece out until it's too late almost. And then you can look back and say, oh, that's why it didn't feel good, because now I know my boundaries and I see how they were violated, right?
Yeah.
And I love that. I wish that we were taught that growing up, to recognize that. I think even like a kid could understand, like, your internal alarm system, like if something doesn't feel good, it's probably not,
Right. I know. I totally agree with you. Yeah. Like, hold on. I had something to say. It was that, hold on.
I rambled on for too long and you forgot it while I was talking.
It was super good what you were saying. I was like, yeah. Okay, I remember. It was that, the process of me having my boundaries violated so many times, in so many ways, and me like suffering through the pain of it. Cause like in that world, at least in that spiritual realm, it was, that sensation of boundaries being violated and me enduring that was normalized. Like that was actually a spiritual act, but it was reframed. It wouldn't be taught in those words, but that's kind of what ended up happening. And through the pain of enduring that for so long, it was like, I had to like really get super raw and uncomfortable for me to be like, enough is enough. And like now my boundaries are a lot more solid, and it's a learning process. I'm not perfect, and I'm not enlightened master, and I'm, if anything I say today sounds a little bit off, hey, I'm not claiming to be perfect here either. It's just that um yeah, it's important to be able to know your boundaries and keep them.
Right.
Yeah.
When you know them, then you know when they're being violated, And
Mhm.
like I said, I wish these are such valuable skills that we should learn so early in life. And it's sad that most of us adults only learn them after they've been crossed. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
wait, I didn't even know I had that boundary, but now I do, but it was too late. But I think it's really important that the work, that's why the work you're doing is so important, because it's helping lay the groundwork for people to understand what could make them vulnerable to a predator who's looking for prey,
Mhm.
and how to recognize some things that we're really conditioned to overlook, because somebody's in a place of authority that we should just automatically respect them because they own a business, because other people follow them, that we assume people are good people because of a title, a position, and maybe a public perspective or group perspective on how other people see them. And I love how you're able to break that down a little bit and help other people discern that, because I think most of us are out there looking for more purpose and looking to ascend, however that is, whether it's spiritually, whether it's in business. A lot of us seek, personal development is a billion-dollar industry, right? And
Yeah.
so what a great place for somebody to hide, knowing how much money there is to be made or how many people could give them, whether it's financial money, whether it's attending a seminar. It's like, what a great place for abusers or perpetrators to hide in,
Mhm.
knowing all the different ways that they could benefit from that. And so again, it doesn't mean every single person that's out there trying to help people is bad, but again, it goes back to what you said about medicine. We have to understand that there's going to be flaws in the system. There's going to be cancer that's residing in it. There's going to be people that don't have your greater good at heart, and it's important for us to realize that and to be able to discern between the people that can help us and can help us get to where we want to be and who genuinely care, versus getting roped into following people or a movement, whatever it is that might end up being a cult at the end of the day. And I love that you're out there
Yeah.
doing that. It's so important. It would have saved me so much if I would have understood this. It would have saved me so much heartache and so many steps, and it would have helped me, progress in my own life so much more, just because it's so relatable in so many aspects of life. For you, do you have anything else that you think would be really important to share about your story, or do you want to talk about anything that you're doing now, or anything that is going on that people can support you with?
Um, I guess. I mean, like, I don't know. It's one of those things you can like keep talking about this
Oh,
stuff
I know. I
forever,
could have you
right?
on 5 times and talk about a million different things.
I think I would just say like, there is a lot of interesting things I've seen and witnessed, especially living in Germany for most of my life and just having come back from Germany. And I've really been interested in bringing forth to light these like, hidden occult symbols. And, I've, um, talking about certain facilities that could be abusing children and all sorts of stuff. So if people want to know what I've seen and heard, you're welcome to just go to my YouTube channel because there's like for example, there's a camp for children with cancer in Heidelberg that is plastered with MK Ultra symbols and occult symbols, and it's like I don't know, it's just one of those like very obvious pieces of information that if you already know about this stuff, you might be interested in seeing. I think I really truly believe in the power of awareness, and just even that these certain facilities and systems that they're even just being brought to the light of our awareness is having an effect on their stability and how much longer they're going to be around. So feel free if you want to like dive into that, you can check out my YouTube channel.
Would you
But
want, are you able to, and I can bring it up if you don't want, we don't have to turn the volume on. I know that you play like this really awesome music with this video that you made, which is awesome. I'd
oh,
love to, if you want to bring that up and just maybe scroll through a couple scenes and show people, I think that would be actually,
Sure.
that'd be
Well,
really, it was awesome that you did.
oh, thank you. Well, I actually, like, speaking of that facility specifically, I have some quick video that I can just show. That's totally
Yeah,
possible.
absolutely. And I know it kind of,
And
if you have, if you bring up your YouTube channel too, then people can see School Sucks, and I'll link it to you for everybody. You can just go right in the show notes and click it, but her YouTube channel is really fascinating.
yeah, thank you. I really love it. Like it was such a safe or such a like during the chaos of everything, it felt so healing and helpful to have that space to like just say what I wanted to say, and put out what was going on because a lot of crazy shit went down being in Germany during that time.
And it probably
Um,
felt healing for you to be able to say what you wanted to say, since you were invalidated for so long for, having an ego anytime you asked a question. It probably was like really healing to just get to be you and to express yourself how you wanted to, and to take that control back.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll show you first the website for the facility, and then
Okay.
I can show a quick video of just the outside of it where all of the symbols are. So it's like, oh yeah, it's obvious.
Yeah,
Um,
that'd be great.
so, um, okay, this might be a bit awkward because it's not showing me everything I had opened, but okay, I'll just, sorry. So, okay, this is the website. It's called Waldpiraten, which means forest pirates, and it's a camp for children with cancer. And as you can see already, we've got the one eye right there with this freaking sun that like has genitals for some reason. Like,
Oh my gosh, what is
what the fuck is
that?
that?
So weird.
It's their mascot. And if you see his hands, if you know like a lot of the occult churches will have this like one hand up, one hand down, like the Baphomet has it, and
Yeah.
some like Jesuit orders do. So he's got that hand. Um, and then Mut Tut Gut. Can you see does that show up?
Yep.
My mouse. So that
Yep.
means courage does you good. So, if you know MK Ultra, going through the trauma, they believe that like traumatizing and abusing the children is ultimately for their own good. That's how fucked up they are.
That's wild though.
Older.
See how many like things targeted towards children have this symbology.
Yeah, exactly. Um, okay, so yeah, it's plastered in it.
I've
Hmm.
never paid attention more to like marketing than I have the last few years. And I can't believe that growing up and even as an adult, that I would see things and just never sit there and ponder it and be like, why'd they choose that? Or like, why does that seem to pop up everywhere? So I love that you're
Hmm.
doing this. Oh Lord.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah. So blatant Disney reference right there. And also the mascot for Waldpiraten is this little raven named Ravensocke, and it's like a famous children's character in Germany. Um, so, and then on their website is the black star, like the sun looking through this black star, which is like obvious occult reference.
Oh my
Um,
goodness. The Black Star. That's crazy.
I know and then I wish I might have a clip of it somewhere, but there was one before where the sun is pointing at a baby in a stroller, but it's gone now. Like they took it off their website.
Wow.
So let me share a quick video of what it looks like on the outside.
How did you
Um,
come across this? Was it the website, or did you saw this place and then decided to investigate?
yeah, I saw it first. I was actually on a hike with my friends and I saw it and I was like, oh my God. But my friends, of course, are like, you're crazy. I was like, you don't understand, guys. Um,
It's like my life
the
every day.
I know, right? Like, this is weird. And the big thing is that it's right next to it's up out of the city in the hills. It's right next to a laboratory, like a science lab, like literally right down the road. And it's right next to this like huge cemetery that has these giant ritual site, which is in the video, like my video, you can see all of that. But it's just like in a really obvious location anyway. So, okay.
Ooh, Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, it came up.
That one
Okay,
came.
yeah. So this is on the outside of the camp, and it's all of the themes they've had throughout the years. Oh, I should mute it. Or I guess the sound doesn't come through anyway, but so we got Creepy Alice. And then I'll go show a new video. Further down, there's a few more. Okay, is it on the Camelot one now?
Yes.
All right, so I did hear from another MK survivor that Sword in the Stone was used in her programming as well. So I think that is a common MK program. So we got Sword in the Stone. We've got this like programming television reference here. That's Rabazalka, the mascot, the crow. And then to me, this is like indicating, you know how they split the psyche with programming, Wizard of Oz. You also see the color coding, which is talked a lot about in MK programming, color coding again, splitting. And then this one is from Momo, is a character. Do you know the Never Ending Story?
Yes.
So the same author wrote a different book called Momo, and this says as the time stands still. It's like a very dissociative story. Momo like leaves time. She's like a child, but she's old. And it's just like you hear a lot about these children's authors who end up being super creepy. And but anyway, this is like another dissociative storyline.
Interesting.
And it's just like all out.
Yeah.
And you know, okay, so all of this combined with everything else.
Wow.
Is,
That's scary.
yeah, because it's like a camp for children with cancer. It's super loved within the community. You know, nobody would, if I was like, hey guys, they're up to no good, everyone's like, okay, you're but I do have a friend who a friend of mine is a scientist at the lab nearby, and he says he knows a few people who work at that camp, and they're assholes. Like they're not good people. I'm not, that's just hearsay. I'm not saying that proves anything, but just I don't know. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and that's common. That's what's so scary is like now again, like I'll look at Target and their ads for kids with their new clothing, and it's the same thing. You see this like one-eyed symbolism and them having these, these themes, these MK themes that they're projecting or wearing, and that's on the background, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, even if it's something like that, that's an ad, it's a subliminal message to a mind of a parent and a child, and it's amazing just how out in the open it is and how literally hardly anybody knows. And they, parents drop their kids off there, parents go there and maybe visit their kids, like they're constantly around it thinking, gosh, how cute, it's all Disney themed, what a place. And it's like, is it? I just think it's important that we start asking those questions. Yeah, these things hide in the most obvious places, and that is what is the most hard thing, for people, I think, to grasp, is that something so bad could be in plain sight like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so much of it could be, there could be like a surface level to that place where they are genuinely helping families with children with cancer. And then because that environment is normalized to have children present, then this other form of abuse can be taking place and nobody's going to question it. And like I'm
too. That's crazy. It's right next to a freaking lab.
I know for sure there's like tunnel access because I've been in those lab tunnels. Like I know that they all are connected, and you hear that all the time from survivors. And yeah, like the ritual, there's the city it's in Heidelberg is sprinkled with ritual sites and tons of symbology everywhere. But yeah, it's just reiterating that there is a very occult heavy presence, and it's happening within normal cities, and really it goes undetected quite easily.
100%. Yeah, sometimes too easily. We're just so conditioned to accept what's in front of us. And again, it's just, now that I'm awake to this, it's so weird looking at stuff and just, I see how weird like a music video looks or an ad. And I
Mhm.
just can't believe that, like, I never considered that to be weird. I don't know how that's so normalized to see all this really weird stuff all the time. It's
Yeah.
bizarre to me.
And so much of it I would interpret as empowering when it was actually, indicating severe abuse was going on. Like, it's just so twisted. Yeah. I know what you mean.
100%.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you're currently working on, and how can people support you?
No, right now I'm just kind of doing my thing. I don't know, I'm like living life, and I feel really good about the place that I'm in, and I do love being connected to the greater survivor community, and I do love talking about the signs of this horrific system that we all need to wake the fuck up to.
Yes.
But that's just like, I really do believe that, we are like so divinely connected to such a greater presence. And um, I'm just working on doing whatever needs to be done. And I don't even know how that's going to unfold, but yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about this stuff, or watch my very obscure videos. I do work with a couple survivors who do appreciate having access to donations when possible. So that's, if it's something you're interested in, you can also reach out to me, but that's of course not expected. And but yeah, that's kind of the only other thing I've been working on right now.
And where can
Um,
people find you? You're on social media. Where are the places that people can connect with you? And then just reiterate your YouTube channel name too.
yeah, sure. So my YouTube is School Sucks. That's coming as me as being an educator for a long ass time. So I can state that confidently. Um, yeah, so you can get in touch with me through YouTube, just messaging me on there in the comment section, or you can find me on Twitter, also at School Sucks. That can all be linked in the description box for sure. And I think those would be the best places to get in touch with me. Yeah.
And then any closing thoughts or anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to bring to light?
No, we really did like a marathon, didn't we?
This was great. It was jam-packed with everything in it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. And like when I found your channel, I was not it wasn't too long ago that I found your channel, and I was just so happy to find like a new survivor resource. And so I feel so honored that I'm on here. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm a little bit of a fangirl. So thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you for being here. This was a long time coming, which was my fault because I haven't been able to connect with you for scheduling.
It's
But
okay.
I just want to thank you because, like I said, I had no idea that you had a story. My impression of you was how supportive you were of the survivors that were on my show, and then connecting with you on Twitter and just seeing you constantly reposting stuff, helping survivors get donations. Like, you were going so hard for everybody, and that was such a standout thing. And especially after everything that you went through, once I discovered you had a story, I was like, oh my gosh, I already thought she was just amazing for stepping in, and now it's like, oh my gosh, and you're carrying this story with you where you could be always just talking about yourself. And it would be awesome if, I'm glad that you are talking about yourself more because your story is just as important, right? But I just want to thank you for going so hard, because it's very rare to see people that do that, and especially somebody who's gone through so much, and you're helping so many survivors with your support. And it's an honor to have you on, after all the good that you do for everybody else. Your story is so important, and I'm so happy that people get to hear it.
Thank you, love.
You're welcome. And for everybody listening, please support Chrystal. She's amazing. She has really enlightening posts. And like I said, if you want to connect with more survivors and learn, she's always sharing all information that she possibly can. She supports all survivors from all walks of life, and she's constantly sharing their content and sharing their stuff, whether it's on Twitter or her YouTube. She's just amazing with supporting this community. And it's mind blowing considering what she's went through, that she has found such a big place in her heart after all her healing to be able to give so much. So give back to her, go fill her cup and follow her, and, you know, lift her up too. She deserves it, especially because she's constantly giving to others. I'll link all of her stuff below. And you guys, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It means the world to me. And it means the world to me that you guys care about the survivors like Chrystal who are willing to come and share. So thank you guys all for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next week.